his second season. I was out here at the game, Rams-Eagles, when he messed up his knee, and he never has been the same. Chris, you could look at a lot of stats. There is a lot of data from last season that says he was the worst quarterback in the NFL. I think Jalen Hurts makes sense going forward. I think this is almost a buy low spot on the Philadelphia Eagles. They were a dumpster fire last year, again with the injuries. I know they got a new head coach. They need a new training staff as well. Maybe Carson Wentz lands with the Bears. I hear that's an organization that loves overdrafted former number 2 picks. You know, Trubisky stinks, and now maybe they bring in Wentz. But Jalen Hurts is the guy in Philly. I love it.
Well, first, let me say this. Carson Wentz does not need to get within 1,000 miles. Maybe that's a little bit of an overstatement. 500 miles of Chicago. Doesn't a guy named Nick Foles still play there? Why in the world? Carson Wentz needs a totally fresh start. You think, I mean, one of his downfalls was that he had to look over his shoulder and see Nick Foles led his team to a Super Bowl. You think he wants to go back to that? Chicago shouldn't even be thinking about Carson Wentz unless they get rid of Nick Foles. Then I'm fine with it. But no, you can't have both of those guys in the same locker room again. Now, as far as Jalen Hurts, I'm stunned that you're stunned. Jalen Hurts has intangibles galore. I am a big intangibles guy when it comes to quarterback because look at Tom Brady. What's made him the GOAT? It's not his arm strength. It's not his foot speed. It's not his athleticism. It is his intangibles. He is a leader of men. He gets in good relationships with the players. They trust in him. They think he has their best interests at heart. He can galvanize the locker room. Joe Montana, another guy some people think is the GOAT. Same thing with him. Dak Prescott, not in their league, don't get me wrong, but he has intangibles. That's why they love him down there in the locker room in Dallas. Russell Wilson was another guy. Some guys just have it, and Jalen Hurts showed us by the way he handled his situation with Tua in Alabama. He showed us at Oklahoma, and he showed us last year by stepping in and immediately turning that team around. They beat the New Orleans Saints in his first start. I know they lost the last 3 with him, but there were obviously circumstances going on there as well. But Jalen Hurts, look, I'm not convinced that he has all the physical tools to be their franchise quarterback. But at this stage, I'm not surprised they've chosen him in the locker room over Wentz because I think with Wentz, physical ability, there. Arm strength, there. You know, running the ball, there. His problem was a lack of intangibles, not getting those guys in the locker room to believe in him and follow him. And that's where I think Hurts has won these guys over.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great point about Jalen Hurts. And adversity is really a theme here, right? We saw Hurts. I think he was something obscene, like 25-1 at Alabama. And then Tua comes in and takes his job and wins a national title. And, you know, Carson Wentz this year faced adversity really for the first time, okay, when they're struggling. And how did he handle it? It says a lot about us how we handle adversity. And Carson Wentz basically shriveled up and was like, I don't want any part of this. Get me out of here. I'm not a backup. And like, that's not how you handle it. You know, you got to man up, face the detractors, realize that, hey, you know what? I'm not playing well. I got to do better. And by all accounts, you know, the Philadelphia Inquirer had a great story about how Carson Wentz was just walking around the facility like it was still his show, even though he was performing at an awful level. And just because he had like the GM's ear and the owner loved him. And I just didn't like what I saw from Carson Wentz at all. Jalen Hurts, I would agree with you, Chris. He feels more like a leader of men than Carson Wentz. Remember, Hurts was drafted. I think he was a 2nd-round pick. And they were like, oh, he could be a gadget guy. You know, he could come in with some goal line trickery, you know, do some fun stuff, line up at wide receiver. And Jalen Hurts was like, okay. And then he comes in and starts and takes down the Saints. And I'm with you, Chris. I like everything I've seen out of Jalen Hurts. I would look at him as the guy moving forward. Plus, Chris, if you are able to start him and unload Wentz, you then can work around his salary, which is very depressed compared to Wentz's, and you can build around the edges in the secondary, which needs massive help. And maybe Philadelphia turns it around quicker than I thought.
Jay, I know I've got you second guessing your Carson Wentz to Chicago take, so I'm going to give you your new answer. All right, Carson Wentz needs to go to Indianapolis. That is the answer. You get him out of the NFC. You send him to the AFC. Frank Reich is there. Frank Reich was the guy in Philly. You mentioned Wentz on his way to the MVP in 2017. Who was the offensive coordinator? It was Frank Reich. All right, they need a quarterback. Their defense is solid. Got a nice running game with Jonathan Taylor, some decent receivers, and it's a completely fresh start. That is what Carson Wentz needs more than anything. He shares a Christian faith with Frank Reich. They can connect with that. I think Reich is a guy that believes in Wentz. If he has a chance to resurrect his career, I think Indianapolis is as good a place as any. And I do think, as bad as Wentz was last year, and to be honest, for the most part, but for the end of the season 2 years ago, he hasn't been good since he came back from the injury in 2017. But I do think he can resurrect himself. I'm not saying MVP level necessarily, but I do think he can become that very good franchise quarterback elsewhere. And I think that Indianapolis is the perfect spot. But they have been unwilling to give up that first-round pick, and I don't blame me, because I would say to Philadelphia, we are taking on this 4-year, $28 million contract for a guy that might not, be that good. And so I would not give Philadelphia what they want. I would take him off your hands and be happy with that, but I do think he could play well for the Colts.
Chris, the good news is we're going to pivot to your All-Star ballot in the East, okay? Now, I do have some issues here, Broussard, okay? Your ballot in the East, you explain it, and I'll tell you where I got the seat.
Well, I'm sure, look, again, the front court, I don't think you can argue. Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Joel Embiid. I mean, anybody that argues that needs to have their head examined. The backcourt is all Brooklyn. So I got 3 Nets starting in the Eastern Conference. Yes, 3 Nets starting because they're the best players. James Harden is looking like Magic Johnson. He doesn't have the no looks down like Magic. But outside of that, Kyrie Irving, we're going to get to it later, he did the right thing. James Harden is a awesome point guard. And Kyrie, 27 points a game, 50-something% shooting from the floor. He's hitting it from 3. J-Mac, Kyrie Irving is one of the most exciting players the NBA has ever had. Best handle in history, finishes at the rim well with either hand, some of the best moves in the league, hits the 3, hits the mid-range, hits the floater, finishes in traffic. What can't he do? I'm sorry. They're the best players. I regret not putting Jaylen Brown on there. He's had a tremendous season. Bradley Beal, I feel for him in Washington, obviously. He's putting up big numbers. But Kyrie Irving and James Harden are the best guards in the East, period, the end.
Okay, so this is the first time in the program I've had to really bite my tongue on something Chris Broussard said. I wanted to get on his case about calling the Jazz a dark horse. They have the best record in the West. But I really have an issue with this gassing up of Kyrie Irving. He went AWOL on his own team. He did not notify the coach where he was going. He just bailed. He said, peace out. I'm going to take a 2-week break. I'll talk to you guys. Yeah, Chris, he's not an all-star. He's not a leader. And James Harden, who I like. NFL. I think Jalen Hurts makes sense going forward. I think this is almost a buy low spot on the Philadelphia Eagles. They were a dumpster fire last year, again with the injuries. I know they got a new head coach. They need a new training staff as well. Maybe Carson Wentz lands with the Bears. I hear that's an organization